Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same thing over and over again, expecting shit to change.
Feeble cursed one.
That means that of all the Souls games, Dark Souls 2 is the only game where I went hollow, where I gave up, not even at a boss, mind you, just at a random place in the Crown of the Sunken DLC, but I have a duty. I have a duty to anyone who has ever loved Dark Souls 2 to finish the DLC for this video and make Dark Souls 2 great again. Okay, I just reused that joke.
I've seen a lot of negative DS2 reviews, but still haven't seen a DS2 hater that understands how to play Souls games. Imagine being in the DLC and still greedily trying to open chests without dealing with the surrounding enemies first.
Send another pyramid and open a chest that I kept dying at.
And then imagine repeatedly dying in the same situation, without considering if you could do something different. That's how DS2 haters actually play.
It's so weird how my invisible score for Dark Souls 2 that I will never reveal ever would go up probably 2 points if I just got iframes at fog walls and levers and chest and basically everything like the previous game. It's sad that one line of code, one simple Boolean statement that any starting computer science major could code would make this game so much better. It's a shame. It's a damn shame.
This is the main difference between DS2 haters and people that understand how to play Souls games. People like Feeble King want the Souls series to be a casual walk through the park where you can just rush through new areas without interacting with any enemies, as they get mad whenever the game puts up the slightest bit of resistance.
Every time the game kills you and it's your own fault, you appreciate the genius that went into the game figuring out how to kill you. But when it's the game's fault, you think, wow, you got me again. I guess you wanted me to die there.
But the most important factor that sets DS2 haters apart from normal people is that unskilled players like Feeble King will always blame the game for their own bad choices. He willingly decided to run around to aggro every enemy in this room without even trying to handle them in any way, and then decided against jumping across the gap to get to safety. Normal people would realize that they did something wrong in this situation, but this is a foreign concept to DS2 haters. They will always instinctively call the game unfair for punishing their own bad decisions.
Dark Souls 2 is the hardest Souls game by a lot when it comes to clearing levels, so the volume of the instrument has never been higher. Unfortunately, the volume of the difficulty is as high as ever.
And of course, DS2 haters always feel the need to go out of their way to aggro every enemy at the same time, instead of just dealing with them in smaller groups or ignoring optional ones. He really makes it seem as if this area is hard, even though he willingly made it harder by just running around to wake them all up at the same time. Normal players would not end up in the same ganky situation that he willingly put himself in.
Not all deaths in hard games are created equal, and dying in Dark Souls 2 is the developer's fault so much of the time that I didn't enjoy the game when the deaths were actually my fault. I didn't enjoy this game at all, but I tried.
He likes to blame the game for everything. This part of Shrine of Amana is his personal Vietnam, and he will complain about it again later in the video, so I'm pretty sure he does not even consider this death to be his fault. He got punished for not even trying to fight his way through areas once to get to the next bonfire, which is where the vast majority of his frustration is coming from.
When I first played Dark Souls 2, I used lock-on for about every single fight, since it was what the first game taught me to do, and I hated every moment of Dark Souls 2 combat, and I completely blame the game for this.
He's so good at blaming the game for his own mistakes, that he even blames the game for not holding his hand by teaching him that he can just not use the lock-on during multi-enemy encounters. And when does DS1 teach players to always stay locked on? Is he even listening to himself?
Dark Souls 2 enemy design is just Dark Souls 1, but harder, and you're slower. I will say that sometimes this type of play works with an unlocked camera.
I do have to admit that he is pretty good at staging gank situations. Luring two of those pyromancers inside and breaking the prisoner out of their cell, and then gathering them all together at the bridge really is a creative way of falsely presenting this game as unfairly hard.
But do you guys remember when I said when I first played Dark Souls 2, I used lock-on camera and I completely blamed the game for this? The developers did nothing to teach me that lock-on is bad. In fact, they taught me in the tutorial area to use lock-on.
Imagine unironically blaming the game for this. Now his whole gameplay makes sense. The tutorial showed him which button to press, and he assumed it means that he should do it constantly. The same thing probably happened when he learned about the run button. But he obviously did not take all the tips from the tutorial as seriously as his misunderstanding that he is supposed to constantly lock on at all times.
The worst part is that FromSoft literally has the solution in the game. There are literally unlockable ghost enemies later in this game. You are so close to teaching the player how to play the game. Why did they not actually teach me?
It's a Souls game. You are supposed to figure out yourself that you cannot see archers while being locked onto another enemy. The first encounter in the first real area already placed enemies in a way where you will look away from the archer if you lock onto them. The game did try to teach him.
The sad thing is that I only know how to use a locked-off camera because of YouTube video essays. This is not a joke. I can only enjoy combat with normal Dark Souls 2 enemies because I watch YouTube essays. That's just ridiculous.
Of course it is the game's fault that he is bad at Souls games and needs his hand held. And why do people with such a poor understanding of Souls mechanics always feel qualified to make a Dark Souls 2 critique?
Alright, now I'll start talking about the positives. When anyone starts their Dark Souls 2 adventure, the first thing that they'll be guaranteed to notice is the change in enemy placement and level design. Gone are the days of tight corridors with just a few too many enemies for the player to ever be comfortable, but not too many enemies to make the player feel like it's unfair.
I'm really wondering if he considers it to be unfair that you will get attacked by a horde of enemies, if you willingly decide to aggro a whole horde of enemies. Really, all his complaints about enemy placements seem to be based on the absolute worst case, which would not happen to normal players.
That brings us to the next point in the ugly. The B team at FromSoft thought players liked the first game because they liked dying, so we need to kill the players. A lot. Even the people who play patiently and are extremely observant will get got in Dark Souls 2, because this is a hardcore game for gamers who want a challenge. Yeah, no, I don't want a game that kills me for killing me. I want a game that teaches me how to survive. In Dark Souls 1, I step on a switch in Sen's Fortress and I die to crossbow bolts. A bit unfair, but I wasn't observant enough to see the switch as I approached. I shouldn't let that mistake ever happen again.
He wasn't even observant enough to notice the hollow hanging from the ledge and the sound of the thief dropping down behind him. And yet, he somehow thinks that he is an expert on observant Souls gameplay, even though we never see his observational skills in action.
Dark Souls 1 usually rewarded patient play in areas like Sen's Fortress where you can scan for traps, or even the bridge where you can see a smoldering black tar that indicates a fire trap could occur, the fire trap being a freaking dragon. But Dark Souls 2 seems to actively try to hide its archers so that you have to die no matter what. It's trial and error. It doesn't reward patient observation.
I really like how he claims that the bridge dragon in DS1 was fair, because you could have seen it coming as there were burned bodies on the ground, but then complains about an archer that he would have seen if he had just paid attention or listened to his arrows hitting the wall, instead of just constantly trying to speedrun through new areas without paying any attention at all. He also seems to think that archers are actively hidden just because he never pays any attention to his surroundings.
But it's not fun at all because the hordes of ranged enemies mixed in with the melee enemies is just awful. Dark Souls 2 late game enemy design feels more like Call of Duty Zombies round 30 knife only rather than Dark Souls combat, except it's actually worse than that. It's round 30 zombies knife only, but half of the zombies have guns that shoot you from random spots where you can't see them or reach them or both. There is a large counter-argument to my complaint, which is that they do have ranged weapons in Dark Souls 2. I can use a bow or magic, and maybe I need to make a full video on this subject, but as I mentioned before, the shooting combat in these games are mechanically unfun.
Mr. Observant Souls gameplay did not even manage to notice the archer that he ran past, even though he hit him. Imagine complaining about a hidden archers that any normal player would have been aware of, as he literally hit that archer 5 seconds ago. Here, that's him.
Respawning invaders, giant gank fest, so many hidden archers. Am I supposed to run past the enemies or fight them? I don't know. If I'm supposed to fight them, why are there hidden archers everywhere during the fight? And if I'm supposed to run past, why is there a turtle in the hallway blocking me right next to an iframeless lever?
This quote-unquote hidden archer really got him mad, which is just so funny, as he is just telling us over and over just how bad his observational skills are. Also, why is he complaining so much about this completely hidden and perfectly invisible archer instead of just playing slow once to see where he is? It's just so embarrassing watching him complain about issues that are solely based on his lack of skills.
And are you supposed to clear Iron Keep or just run past everything? I genuinely couldn't tell. And don't get me started on Iron Keep. This level is just so terrible. I mentioned it earlier, but we're gonna go on a rant. It's awful, the worst. Actually, maybe there's worse levels in Dark Souls 2.
Before we move on, I would like to point out that he did 127 damage. That's because he uses a +3 broadsword and no rings.
My weapon was about to break, so I couldn't fight the boss.
He only has 4 Estus charges and no Estus upgrade as well. It's like he is doing an accidental challenge run from rushing through the game so much. If he had explored the previous areas thoroughly, he could have had a fully upgraded weapon by now, but all his weapon and Estus upgrades look like he is still in the forest area. This is the kind of player that is convinced that Dark Souls 2 is a horribly unbalanced game. Someone who doesn't interact with half the content and mechanics in the game and who just doesn't even try to do anything to tip the balance in their favor.
Even the areas where bonfires are too close to each other feel correct because there are usually no shortcuts in the level design, and the player has to progress past a giant gauntlet of enemies to reach the next bonfire, so it feels fair.
Based on his clips, I'm pretty sure that he just ran through the poison pool in Earthen Peak, where he could have picked up so many upgrade materials. Dealing as little damage as he does really makes the game a lot more frustrating. But let's get back on track.
Why is there a turtle in the hallway blocking me right next to an iframeless lever? And iframes only exist in the middle of the animation. Why? So I'm supposed to run past enemies and get iframes, but to artificially inflate the difficulty, we'll just not give some of the animation iframes just to make it a bit more likely for the player to die, because they like dying, right? That's why we play Dark Souls, because we're dumb masochists who like to die a lot in video games.
He is too lazy to clear an area once to get to the next bonfire, but instead of blaming himself, he just blames the game for not teaching him that he isn't supposed to just blindly speedrun through new areas. Even though the game has been teaching him this lesson since the very beginning, I'm seriously starting to think that he just likes dying a lot, because no normal person would willingly aggro every enemy at the same time instead of just dealing with them in small groups. He also seems to think that everyone else plays just as bad as he does.
There is a giant issue with Dark Souls 2 combat, and it isn't the combat itself, it's the fact that FromSoft didn't realize they made a good combat system. Now I know this is a rather bold statement to make, as I'm essentially saying the actual developers did not understand the game was fun, but I sincerely believe this. I don't even know if the developers played with a locked-off camera.
Imagine needing to read an online guide to realize that you do not need to lock on during multi-enemy encounters, and then accusing the developers of being just as dense. I'm also pretty sure he never realized how these traps work, despite falsely claiming to be such an observant player. Pure skill issues mixed with arrogance.
I think that they might have put in so many giant gank squads in the beginning areas of the game just to kill the player a shit ton. I don't think the B team at FromSoft realized they had a special combat system that was uniquely fun and slow, deliberate feel. I think that they made it slow just to make it harder, and that it's accidentally fun when you're locked off, and they didn't actually know that it would be fun.
I like how he never considered that he died a lot due to his severe skill issues. It's always the developer's fault that he never tried to learn from his mistakes.
What is the developer's intended way to play the game? Am I supposed to play like it's a level 1 run and run past the enemies? Fog walls have no iframes, so I should fight the enemies, but there's literally 30 enemies chasing me around combined with 15 archers and spellcasters hidden in random spots that I can't reach. So should I fight them or run past them? What are the developer intended ways to play? I can't tell.
Just like with locking on, he really seems to struggle with the nuance of how to approach enemy encounters. The developer's intention is clearly for him to fight his way carefully through an area at least once, but he somehow never learned that lesson. All the hidden archers he complains about could have easily been detected by just paying attention, instead of complaining that he doesn't notice them while running past them.
After killing Smelter Demon, I got to the worst room of Iron Keep with all the hidden archers. I said previously that a player needs a bow to make this level fair, which angered the comments, and you know what? Fair enough. Instead of fighting the enemies in the room the designers placed them in, I can always just slowly lure every group really far away so that I'm safe from archers. Are you guys happy now? Did I get good now? Is this what you want?
You might feel a strong deja vu, but he actually complained so many times about this hidden archer. Imagine pulling this lever several times and never realizing that there's an archer on this platform. An archer that he himself ran past and hit him while doing so, an archer that's not hidden in any way. That's what broke him. Seriously, just look in the direction where the arrow came from if you want to know where an archer is hidden. The way he presents his poor decision-making and skill issues as flaws of the game is astounding. He is really so good at making things look way more frustrating and unfair than they actually are.
Do I need to explain why this is bad design? The only way to fight without being harassed by hidden archers is to either A, engage with boring ranged combat, or B, slowly lure every group of archers to another part of the level to make this game fair. I'm certain some Scholar fan will use 4D chess to explain why this is actually great game design and I suck.
Yes. Also, what about C? Just paying attention and defeating the hidden archer before you engage with the other enemies, and not lowering the platform to prevent the upper archer from aggroing.
Speaking of negative feelings, somehow playing Scholar correctly made Iron Keep worse. Let's discuss. So I began Iron Keep by slowly clearing every enemy and pulling every lever. Then in typical Dark Souls 2 fashion, my weapon was about to break so I couldn't fight the boss. Another example of Dark Souls 2 jank not working when paired up with enemy spam.
Or his weapon broke, because it's basically unupgraded and thus needed a lot more hits to defeat enemies. I also think that the difficulty of this run back is massively exaggerated. Even without running it isn't hard.
So I rest at the bonfire and proceed to do the boss run, only to realize that it's impossible. You want to know why? Because I cleared the level slowly and pulled both levers. Now that the bridge is fully flat, the enemies on the other side aggro and make the boss run literally impossible. I tried so many times to no avail. I was genuinely punished for clearing the level slowly and interacting with every mechanic. This game is ridiculous. It doesn't get worse than this.
That's not even true. With the bridge up, he got hit by the Elan Knight at the end of the bridge, who will be further away if you let the bridge down, as he will walk onto the bridge to attack you. When he had the bridge down, this Elan Knight was no longer the problem. The problem was that he was wasting time picking up his empty souls, while the Elan captain was already starting his attack. If you realize that you are about to get hit, you could just roll out of the animation to get to safety. Or just increase your poise to prevent getting staggered out of the animation. Even 3 of them can't stop me.
Forcing the player to use boring ranged weapons that slow down the flow of combat tremendously in a dumbed down cover shooter, or making the player deal with 10 ranged enemies at once is not fun. It's downright terrible design. Dark Souls 2 has enemy design created for a different game, maybe a good melee ranged mixed Devil May Cry combat system that has no lock-on would make Dark Souls 2 enemy design fun, but this enemy design in a Dark Souls game seems like it was tailor-made made to kill the player as much as possible rather than be fun at all.
Why is he fighting against 3 frogs? Didn't he just tell us earlier about patient observation, and how well it was handled in DS1 with the Traps and Sense Fortress and the Hellkite Drake? This area highly rewards paying attention. He could have seen the enemies that are sticking out of the water, or the pillars that he could use to block ranged magic. I will die on the hill that both the Ironhearth Hall and Shrine of Amana are great areas for good players. These areas are skill checks that test if the player has learned anything from the game so far. They are all about paying attention, so it is no surprise that they are so hated by unskilled players that just blindly rush through new areas.
Dark Souls 2 is a bad game. When a game is hard, it holds itself to a higher standard.
Why is he getting attacked by a second frog from the right here? I'm guessing what happened is that he defeated the first 2 priestesses and then just walked past the first frog. This one. Yeah, that seems plausible.
Musician is playing the music loudly, and when it's bad, it's really noticeable. Either the player will learn new ways to interact with a mechanically challenging game that is a satisfying experience, or in Dark Souls 2's case, the player will realize that the developer intention was for them to die a lot no matter how much they try to learn, which just isn't fun. It's not good. It's bad. Bad game design is heightened when you die to a cheap death, and the penalty is a lot of time wasted.
What's actually really noticeable is that he doesn't pay any attention. He makes it seem as if this moment is unfair, although he could have just rolled away once he noticed that the enemy was charging up an explosion, but no, he decided to just ignore the danger. Observant players would just climb up again once they hear him charge up.
Some of the worst sections in the game, which means that now more than ever, I can't understand if I'm supposed to fight all of the enemies. FromSoft also brought back the spellcasters in hard-to-reach areas that at points feels more obnoxious than Shrine of Amana, which is a real achievement in bullcrappery. The worst part about all of the issues with the level design is that there aren't too many doors or levers for you to die on due to a lack of iframes.
I never even thought that someone would complain about this easy room. Especially not that the complaint would be about the slow spellcasters instead of the spiky hedgehogs. If you just explore the lower area before taking the ladder up, the Hexer will come down to you and you can fight him safely behind the pillars. As usual, fighting the enemies to get through an area is better than just running around aimlessly.
Which makes me think the intended way of playing is just running past all of the enemies. I believe this because I don't think anyone on the design team killed all of these enemies on a melee character, and no one wants to do a long drawn-out cover shooter ranged fight in Dark Souls because it's freaking boring. This is peak Dark Souls 2 bad enemy design, and it's not nearly as fun as the enemy placement in Crown of the Sunken King. I really do think that the developers who played through this section just ran through it like I did. I don't think they interacted with their own mechanics.
I really like how he always assumes that even the developers must be just as bad at Souls games as he is. And I really like how someone that did not even try to engage with an enemy encounter thinks that he is qualified to discuss the quality of that encounter. As usual, this encounter is a lot more fun to players that actually play the game, and frustrating to players that get mad whenever it's not easy to just run through.
Tried, and I really wanted to like Dark Souls 2, but I can't. I hate Dark Souls 2 more than almost any other game I have ever played. I probably hate this game more than I should, to be honest, and
he gets frustrated whenever there is a choke point. All I'm hearing is that the game is bad because you have to fight your way through areas once in order to get to the next bonfire. The fact that he can't easily cheese the game really seems to be the main reason for his dislike.
you can die getting stuck on an open chest or climb ladder animation that gives no iframes and you can't break free of the animation. Okay, now I'm done with the nitpicks.
And once again we have a situation where he complains about something that would not have happened if he had just tried to play the game. The game constantly taught him that he needs to fight his way to the next bonfire, but somehow he still always tried to just run through new areas without fighting any enemies on the way. Why would someone even try to climb up a ladder after an enemy dropped down right between them and that ladder? That's an obvious sign that you are doing something wrong.
But the gang squads are only marginally better. There are way less ranged enemies, thank God, but the gang squads and melee enemies are turned up to 11. There are still some areas where I don't know if the developers even want me to beat all the enemies because there's so many, or just run past and memorize the iframeless switches where I actually need to fight or kite enemies away from the switch. I don't love clearing Dark Souls 2 DLC levels, but I don't hate it like the Iron Keep, and the interconnected level design is really good, which leaves me conflicted.
And once again he just runs to the lever instead of trying to figure out what the obvious solution to this puzzle is. As this room shows up in every negative DS2 review, I've already shown a lot of smart ways to approach this encounter, so here is one without using tools like alluring skulls or fire arrows.
The level design of some late game areas is so bad that I genuinely couldn't figure out if I'm supposed to kill the enemies or just run past them. I kept trying to fight only to die, and then I'd try to run past only to die anyways. Are you supposed to be able to clear No Man's Wharf or just run past everything?
I still do not understand where he got the impression from that he is supposed to just run past everything. No Man's Wharf is once again a level that is really not unfair if you just take your time to fight your way through until you unlock the next shortcut. If you die and know where the enemies are, it is easy to run back via one of the shortcuts. If this area had been in any other Souls game, the community would herald it as one of the best early game areas, as the whole atmosphere and mechanics around it are just so great. Like every level in this game, it rewards patient observation and punishes people that just run through new areas without paying any attention. This is one of many early game areas that would have taught him that he is not supposed to just run through new areas, but somehow he still tried it throughout the whole game, and then called the game unfair for not letting him do that, and even blamed the game for not teaching him that he can play unlocked as well. It's just really hard for me to take his critique seriously, as the vast majority of what annoyed him about the game would have not happened if he had just paid attention and learned from his mistakes, as you were supposed to do in a Souls game. So to summarize, mad cause bad.
But that's Dark Souls 2. A game not designed around being rewarding or something you can learn and master with time, but a game whose only goal is to kill you a lot.